Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the Editorial Director at Choice. If you're new to The Authority File, you can listen to and find previous episodes on all of the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, and on our website, choice360.org. My guests for this series are Tamsine O'Riordan, Editorial Director, Social Science, and Felicity Plester, Editorial Director, Humanities, both from Palgrave Macmillan. In the next 4 episodes of this series, which is provided with support from Palgrave Macmillan, Tamsine and Felicity provide a fascinating look behind the scenes at how Humanities and Social Sciences publishing supports social justice. We'll look at the roles HSS plays in the way we solve and confront some of the most pressing issues of the day, from the perspectives of research acquisition, community engagement, and the publisher's own internal operations. In this first episode, we're introduced to Tamsine and Felicity, who explain how Humanities and Social Sciences publishing balances a mission of advancing knowledge while affecting social change. We'll also get an explainer on how the science and HSS publishing teams have worked together to leverage interdisciplinary opportunities since the 2015 merger of Macmillan Science and Education with Springer Science and Business Media. All right, Tamsine and Felicity, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Bill.
Hello. So let's do some quick introductions. Tamsine, as Social Science Editorial Director, what is your role at Palgrave? And Felicity, you're an Editorial Director in Humanities. If you could describe your area of focus and what that entails, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm Tamsine, and I'm the Editorial Director for Social Science. And as part of that, I lead a team of 14 editors. They're based in the UK, in the US, in Australia, and China. To ensure that we're really publishing both topical and or intellectually relevant content across a really wide range of social sciences. And that entails a quite wide range of tasks and projects. A lot of these programs grew out of our original stronghold in sociology, but we now have programs across sociology, linguistics, education, criminology, migration studies, gender studies, and anthropology. And then on top of that, we invested some years back on a really fast-growing sub-team that would focus on what we now call science and society. So those are the areas that cross between some of the natural or applied sciences, but that have a social slant too. So that includes things like geography, psychology, and science and technology studies. So between all these editors and me, we manage a backlist of over 62,000 titles in print. And by that, I mean ebook as well. And at present, we have nearly 1,000 signed contracts waiting to become books. So it's a pretty substantial amount of content and knowledge there. But as well as ensuring we're a sustainable presence in terms of output for the business, I also wear a championship role hat for both books and for social science in the wider company and beyond, to make sure that we're connecting and contributing to larger initiatives and bringing social science expertise into the company to support larger corporate goals and values. And I know we'll dig into this more later.
Excellent. Felicity, how about you?
Hi there. Yeah. So the humanities team is similarly large. We've got 13 commissioning editors publishing across a range of disciplines. We have editors in London and New York office. We publish around 800 titles a year. The humanities team itself is actually divided into 2 for no other reason apart from myself and the other editorial director, Victoria Peters, is part-time. So my side of the team commissions across literature, film, culture, media studies, and theatre and performance studies. And Vicky's side acquires in history, philosophy, and religion. Our editors essentially bring in the content that we go on to publish. So networking is a really big part of this. We go to lots of academic conferences, go out on campuses, following up on leads, really kind of building those author and series editor relationships. We are finding out about new and hot topics and emerging trends, assessing proposals, doing peer review, contracting, then really overseeing that book project right through to publication. So our editors really are the responsible people for the books that they bring in. At its most basic the role of the editorial director is to sort of drive the team to reach their commissioning, publication, and revenue targets. But obviously, it's a lot more than that. We also need to think about the types of books that we publish and the strategies we employ to do this, really. So another element of it is assessing kind of internal processes with a view to making them more efficient and fit for purpose. And that's something that's kind of ongoing. But also being very sort of outwards facing in terms of highlighting the value of humanities content within the wider world as well.
Excellent. Tamsine, I wanted to go back to you real quick, and you mentioned I think you call it a subgroup that was formed, sort of an interdisciplinary. It sounded like. Can you talk about like why that was? What sort of facilitated the creation of that group? What caused that?
Yeah, sure. It's something we're really proud of, and it was quite an unusual move to kind of create something in a less organic way.
Yeah.
It was driven at the time by researching funding trends and movements that happen at university level. And interdisciplinarity is something I think we're going to talk about quite a lot in this session, but it was something that we identified at Palgrave Macmillan quite some time ago now as being a growth area and a trend that we need to capture, and also a really important way of proving the value of the humanities and social sciences as well. So we felt that we needed a content strategy that would then drive a structural strategy internally that would allow us to really focus on those areas.
Excellent. Okay. So you both have commented in the past about the dual role that sciences and humanities play in understanding our world, often noting that science is only part of the story, obviously. Can you briefly explain the role that the humanities and social sciences play in the way we solve and confront some of those pressing issues of the day?
Sure. I mean, this is one of my favorite topics, actually. But I think a lot of publishers have reported a real increase in interest and requests for access to titles with a social justice theme in the broader sense of the term. I know that in 2021, we saw some data that showed that US publishers saw an increase of 160%. There are huge social, cultural, political reasons for this, of course, from a kind of popular culture perspective. But this could include things like structural inequality, how that interacts with things like COVID and with climate change, every new big challenge that it's thrown our way. There is a social element to it. There's a structural element to it. And we need a range of subjects and approaches to make these discoveries, interpret the world around us, make sound critical decisions, and then communicate them effectively as well. And we've really, as I mentioned before, tried to continue to structure our imprint in a way that allows us to fulfill this hunger for new ideas and new solutions. For example, we are one of the very few publishers to have broken out of these traditional disciplinary silos and invested in editorial roles that focus solely on finding research that needs to be published on gender studies, migration studies and borders, or the sociology behind and driving climate change. And then our editors work really hard to find research that also takes an intersectional approach. And this is something that social sciences can really inform a lot of other subject areas on how to do it. Or it takes on a critical perspective or draw from emerging methodologies to allow for these fast developing fields on things like computational social science and digital humanities. So, yeah, it is something that we're thinking about all the time. And we, as a publishing company, we follow the trends in the research communities, but we also hope that we're out there ahead driving them as well.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to maybe expand on that a little bit and have you explain or help us understand where you think scholarly publishing sits in balancing its mission of, at a fundamental level, advancing knowledge with that of actually affecting change in society.
Okay, well, I think it's important to note that there's a difference between being academic publishers and being activists. So we don't have a specific agenda. We're not choosing a side. We don't want to be dragged into kind of distracting culture wars. Our job really is to find the people that are doing the most interesting work, of the highest intellectual quality, and who've got the best arguments, and then really help them present them in the most compelling way and ensure that they're widely disseminated. And if we do that, then hopefully positive change will follow. And just to add to that, our authors are predominantly scholars, but we do also publish a lot of practitioners, journalists, and activists. So we have this kind of wealth of global perspective and experiences from which to draw. And this diversity of voices and opinions is really quite vital to ensuring that we don't favour one particular agenda or conception of what is good. We're aware of the pitfalls of misinformation and this kind of post-truth era, and Tamsine was going to touch on this quite a bit later, but academic freedom of expression remains core to our publishing ethos, and that really is what we're trying to do.
If I could briefly add to that, actually, Bill,
Yeah.
I don't think that the two goals of advancing knowledge and affecting change exist without each other, or for that matter, do they have to sit in opposition for a commercially sustainable business? And I do think we're existing in an era where the idea of progress as linear is being challenged, and scholarly and scientific knowledge has to sit right at the centre of that. Just another note really is that as a publisher, we do try and take our parts as stewards of knowledge really quite seriously. So there's things going on in academic circles at the moment that we have to really think about how we respond as a business. There's the banning of certain subject areas like gender studies in particular countries, or critical race theories at educational institutions. We do have to find a way to interact with these trends.
Yeah, it's interesting that some of these disciplines or areas of study and research, which have been going on forever, really, are suddenly being challenged, in this era of like what alternative facts. And I suppose just by the function of doing this research or publishing this research, all of a sudden it's borderline activism, because there's this part of our community that thinks that kind of research or that kind of knowledge should not exist or be studied. So it's weird that it's not really activism. It's just doing what we've been doing for decades anyway.
Yeah.
So let's have a little brief discussion on sort of operational and organizational structure within Springer. Palgrave Macmillan merged with Springer back in 2015, Springer Nature back in 2015. Can you explain how the science and HSS publishing groups work together and leverage interdisciplinary opportunities? How has that dynamic played out over the last 7 years?
Well, I'm going to be really pedantic, first of all, and say that it's not entirely true. So basically, it was Macmillan International Publishing and then Palgrave Macmillan as part of that, but also Nature Publishing Group was kind of a really big part of that merged with Springer International Publishing in 2015. And then that went on to create Springer Nature. So yes, I just thought I'd clarify that. It's not abundantly obvious, which I will go on to discuss why. I mean, obviously, Palgrave Macmillan used to have the kind of name recognition of its parent company being Macmillan International Publishing. So now that we are an imprint of Springer Nature, we don't have that very obvious link anymore. So it has been a little bit confusing for our author communities, and this rather annoying narrative has kind of persisted that we've been sort of taken over by Springer rather than merged with them. So ensuring that there still really is good brand recognition for Palgrave is really of key importance to us. And obviously the name Springer Nature also has a lot more resonance with scientific publishing. I mean, Springer has a huge foothold in this, but also Nature is Nature. I mean, it's the biggest scientific magazine in the entire world. It's fantastic. So, there's kind of HSS gets a little bit lost within that sometimes, but we should remember that, humanities and social science books form around 40% of Springer Nature's total books output. And actually over half of those humanities and social science books are from Palgrave Macmillan. So we're not an insignificant part of it at all. And Springer Nature, it's a vast and varied company now. We've got about 13,000 employees globally in about 50 different locations, as well as books. We obviously publish a huge number of journals, magazines, there's various publishing services and solutions as well. And for the last 4 years or so, we've been arranged via product type rather than kind of discipline or imprint. So, for example, both STM and HSS books teams work together as part of the books group now, which has loads of advantages actually, and it's enabled adjacent departments such as production and marketing to work more efficiently. But also on those occasions where issues do crop up, they are very much sort of shared issues. So experienced similarly by other colleagues or other author communities, even though they're working on completely different subjects, which has actually been quite interesting, and it puts us in a really good position to then kind of address them fully and make things better as well.
Right.
So just to add to that as well, I mean, I touched on this for my social science team, but also to mention that 6 years ago, we published a quite meta, really, book by two academics from different disciplines where they reported on the experience of working together as they wrote. And that's really kicked off quite a lot of thinking across Palgrave Macmillan and the company on pulling out the challenges of interdisciplinary collaboration and where we as an organisation could perhaps support this. So a particularly inspiring project for me in the last year has been working in partnership with the UN SDSN organisation. We ran two roundtables on the broad topic of learning from crisis, from COVID to climate change. We chose 3 topics which we felt would have the most impact: tackling misinformation, behaviour change, and inequality. And the roundtables were designed in a really exciting and innovative way to bring together people that would not normally meet. They were cross-sectoral and they were from different disciplinary backgrounds. And we really sort of forced them to sit down and talk to one another in a way of new knowledge creation that you don't see very often. And it gave us some really interesting learnings about the process itself, as well as we've now published a nice white paper on the subject itself. And some of the outcomes are so much richer from this experience. So this was very much an innovation that Palgrave Macmillan played part of because of our presence in HSS, that we were able to do this. And then we can't not mention the UN SDGs as part of this context as well. So this is one of the most major projects for us, Spring and Nature at the moment. These obviously centre connecting traditional knowledge and disciplines at their very core. And they also show the need for applied research and cross-sectoral collaboration, and also co-produced research, which is something else we're really interested in looking at. And again, this is an area where the humanities and social sciences keeps proving their value.
Excellent.
You just heard from Tamsine O'Riordan, Editorial Director, Social Science, and Felicity Plester, Editorial Director, Humanities, both from Palgrave Macmillan. This series is brought to you with support from Palgrave Macmillan. Join us next week as we turn our gaze inward and look at the DEI policies and practices Palgrave and other publishers in general are implementing to decenter a westernized approach to research and the operational elements that support it.
One huge benefit, actually, of Palgrave Macmillan joining the Spring and Nature family was that we became so much more global, from the supply chain and the colleagues that we work with to where we've been able to base our editors. And this does have an impact on our parallel and more deliberate efforts to globalize our author base. And there's many drivers for needing to do that. But we do need to look at the kind of fullest meaning of diversity and inclusion, of representation. So globalness is important, but we have to take an intersectional approach on this. It doesn't just matter where you're based in the world to make sure that we're centering less Western and more Northern voices. I think my answer is this is very complex, but we've started.
Yeah.
As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.